track your money, they say. And that could go a lot of different ways. And we have an idea of what we need to track in terms of our expenses to stay in budget. But the reality is that there are other numbers you should have on your radar. And I'm going to talk about exactly what those are and why they're important. So let's get to it. Bienvenida to Her Dinero Matters, the podcast helping Latinas have increased confidence and control over their finances. I am Jen Hemphill, and over the years, I've been on a mission to empower countless of women like you through this podcast and through my financial counseling services. Now, my expertise isn't just a result of my own life experiences or a few Google searches. I also became an accredited financial counselor that helps me serve you at a higher standard. Now, if you've been liking what you're seeing and hearing, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a thing. Now, let's get the show started. When it comes to your money, you definitely should be tracking your expenses because you need to know exactly where your money is going. Hopefully, you are planning where your money is going with the budget and then executing on that plan. Hopefully you're doing that, but sometimes life doesn't go according to plan and it is what it is. So it is definitely essential to track. Sometimes the tracking of expenses and what you spend can be tedious, but it doesn't have to be that way. There's apps now, and essentially if you create how you manage your money in a way, you can track easier if you're using one, let's say an easy way to know where your money is going is if you're using your credit card and paying it in full. The credit cards have a good way. They give you that pie chart of what's going to entertainment and all that. So that's one way to easily track versus taking out your receipts and adding everything up because that's tedious. And there's apps that help you also keep a log of where your money is going. And that is all good, but there are definitely some essential numbers that we also need to be aware of. And that's what I want to focus on today. But before I do that, let's talk about the expenses that you can't ignore, that you want to be tracking. And of course, you may think it's all the expenses. Yes, but I want you to think about it a little differently. I'm creating 3 categories, if you will. So that way, hopefully it allows you to think a little differently or maybe have an aha moment or a light bulb moment. So the one expense that you want to track are your necessary expenses to live. So your food, your housing, your transportation, because those are necessary to live and just live your life daily. So you want to make sure you track that because you want to see if, let's say, your light bill goes up, then you know that if your money is running out faster, it could be maybe the light bill went up, maybe you're spending more in transportation. So you need to track to have a better idea of if when the spending is increased, you know exactly where that is coming from. So the necessary expenses, and this is a more tedious one because, well, not tedious, but it's just with these expenses that I'm talking about right now, these 3 areas, it just takes more time. You have to do that more often. The second area is the fun and entertainment costs. And these you want to track for, not just for your awareness, but also just to make sure you keep your budget in check. Especially if you've created that plan, if you created that budget, you have allocated, if you will, a certain amount for fun, for entertainments, for those things that aren't necessities, if you will, but they're fun. You want to enjoy your life. So those you want to make sure that you have more, since these aren't necessities, if you will, you have more control over these than, for example, your mortgage, right? Or your car payment or transportation or food. So the fun and entertainment costs, those you have a little more control over to decide, hey, I'm going to minimize this expense versus in other areas. So that's the second area that you don't want to ignore. The third area that you don't want to know are maintenance costs for the house, for the car, especially if you own a house. You want to be preparing for when the roof leaks, or when you have to replace the AC, when you have to replace carpeting, because all those things are part of come with home ownership. The same with a car. Eventually, it's going to need new brakes or new tires, or all these things that you have to replace. You have to do the oil change. So these, you want to be tracking these are occasional expenses, and really planning, because the goal here is to, as you track what these are occasional expenses, they don't come every single month. As you track, you have a better idea what it's costing you to maintain the house. If you have a house, what it's costing you to maintain the car, and so you can better plan for them. Of course, with these, when these come due, they can throw your spending out, just especially if you're not planning for it. So that's why it's good to track, to get an idea of what it is, to set what you're spending in the maintenance, and to set some money aside, because it's, once those expenses come due, it's going to make your life a whole lot easier. So of course, you're not surprised that I say these things, right? These are expenses that you definitely need to keep track. You need to be aware of. You need to do some planning for, especially when it comes to the maintenance, right? So I talked about the three money areas, three money numbers, if you will, that you definitely want to track, and that those three areas are money numbers that you have to work to keep, that you have to do continual work to track. So that's just going to be the most laborious one out of all, but it's not as hard as it sounds. And I spoke about why earlier. Now I want to talk about money numbers that you do need to track, that really people don't pay attention to. But the good news is that is not something that you have to do month after month. You just have, and let me just go ahead and get into it. So number one, so there's four of these. Number one is you want to be aware. You want to track your net worth. Now, tracking your net worth is not anything that you have to do every single month. But let me back up so we're on the same page. And your net worth is essentially your assets minus your liabilities. So what you own minus what you owe. So let's just keep it simple, that you own a house, but you also owe a mortgage. So your net worth, if this was just all you had, would be the value of your house minus what you owe on the mortgage. That final number, when you subtract the value of the house minus what you owe on the house, is your net worth. Of course, there's other assets you can include in there, your retirement funds, all of that. But on the liabilities, there's also, if you have credit card debt, any type of loan, any type of debt, you subtract from your assets. Now, with your net worth, people think the net worth is just for the rich, but really, it really tells a story of your life in your current season of your life. It helps you track your progress as to where you're at, your financial wellness, your financial health, if you will, where you're at. And that number is not going to necessarily change drastically month after month, unless you pay a big chunk of money, maybe pay a big debt off, or maybe you put a lot more into retirement, whatever your scenario is. It's not going to necessarily change. It can. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's not going to necessarily change. So you don't have to do a lot of adding month after month. So it may go up a little bit, it may go down a little bit. If, like, let's say you take out some debt, some loan, and then you pay it off, then it goes up. But it really tells a story of your current season of life. And I think it's important to know what your net worth is so you know where you're at. So that's number one. Number two, you want to know, and this one may be unpopular, and I'll tell you why. So you really want to know how, if you have an emergency savings, which hopefully you are working on, you want to know what that emergency savings translates into in terms of how long will it sustain you in case of an emergency. So experts typically say that you need to have 3 to 6 months of your expenses. I would say your necessities, your food, your housing, your transportation, any utilities that you have to pay, all those things that you definitely have to pay month to month. If that's $2,000 a month, you want to have 3 to 6 months. Maybe it's even more now with how life is. You may need more, but because of how life is, it may be harder to build depending on your scenario because things are more expensive. And why I say it may be an unpopular thought to really track this is for if you're, let's say, well, I don't even have 1 month of emergency savings, is depressing. Now, I don't want you to think of in terms of what you don't have, or if you don't have enough that, this is depressing, you failed. No, I'm not coming at this in that view. I'm coming at this is that you want to know where you stand. I'm big about understanding where you stand so you know what you need to do. So let's say, worst case scenario, you don't have a month. Maybe you just have several $100s in your emergency savings. The average American has maybe $400 to $500. So let's just say that's the case. And your expenses are well over $2,000. Well, you know that you don't have a full month. Should there be an emergency that there's, let's say, no income coming in, you're only going to be covered that $400 to $500, right? That you have. But knowing that you need, let's say, 2,000, I think that's the number I threw out, then you know where you need to work on to get to 1 month of emergency savings. So again, if you don't have the emergency savings that you need, or you feel like you're behind the ball, this is not to make you feel like you failed. This is more of creating awareness of where you are at so you can create a plan to move forward and increase the emergency savings. Because when you have the emergency savings, and that's necessarily the one that you need, or the one that the emergency savings that money experts say you have to have. I'm saying when you have some sort of emergency savings that covers a month or maybe 2 months of your expenses, it gives you confidence that should something happen, you're covered, right? So that's why I want you to understand in terms of the money that you have set aside, how long will it cover you for? Not to make you feel terrible if you don't have a lot, but really to get you to work towards a better situation, a better emergency savings. So hopefully you and I are on the same page with that. The third one that I think you should have, the third number that you should have be on your radar is your retirement money, what it looks like in a monthly salary. It goes along with the same as emergency savings. Maybe you haven't saved a lot for your retirement and you're thinking, I don't want to even look at that or think about that because I don't know if I'm going to have enough for retirement. Again, this is not to bring those thoughts. This is more for awareness. And of course, whatever you have now, that's going to grow. And I'm not making this like, I don't want to make it super complicated because we know in the future the cost of living is going to be more. You have to account for inflation. I don't have like a fancy calculator to do all that. What I'm saying is have an understanding of what you have now for the retirement. Should you retire now, how much could you pay yourself monthly? Granted, should you retire now? I'm saying that if you could, right? If you were at that age that you could, because when it comes to retirement money, you're not going to be able to tap into it to a certain age. But thinking along the lines, should you retire now, how long would it last you? How much would you be paying yourself on a month-to-month basis? And again, I don't do this to scare you, but to get you thinking, to give you an awareness. And if it's not in a place that makes you feel comfortable, what can you do to get to a place that is more comfortable with your retirement? What does that look like? What are the options, right? And start thinking and brainstorming. Because what I don't want you to do is just invest, 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 and then not have an understanding what this means to you later and how you can possibly live, right? Yes, I want you to invest, but I want you to have a better idea of in the future what if you had a certain chunk of money, what would that do for you on a monthly basis? What would that, what kind of life would you be living? So hopefully that makes sense. So that's number three. Number four, and these is how much have you been paying in taxes? Taxes are your biggest bill by far, your tax liability. So you want to understand and ask questions. If you use a CPA, a tax preparer, ask questions as to, okay, this is what I paid in 2023. This was how much taxes. The year before in 2022, I paid this much and it went up, down, whatever, whichever way it went. You want to have an understanding of why. It could be your income increased if you were paying more, but you want to have that understanding so you know what you need to do to decrease the tax liability. You can decrease the tax liability some. So that could be in terms of more deductions. You can increase what you're putting into retirement, which reduces how much, well, not all retirement. It's in terms of when it's the 401ks, those type of retirement plans. So it reduces how much you're liable for in taxes. There's credits that you can take. So understanding your how much you pay in taxes and getting curious as to what the differences are in the years before can allow you to ask some questions of your accountant, of the professional that helped you to better prepare yourself for the following tax year to see what you can do to minimize your tax liability. All right. So those are four numbers that you want to track that you don't, and you notice with net worth, it's not going to necessarily always change month to month unless you do something drastic, right? Either get into drastic debt or make a lot more money or get out of debt, quickly. So these are numbers that you don't that don't necessarily change, and they're not as hard to track as your expenses are. So we've talked about the net worth. We talked about your emergency savings, why you want to track that and have that on your radar. Your retirement money, why you want to track that in terms of what it looks like and have it on your radar, and how much you paid in taxes. So I hope that you found this helpful. Again, today we talked about numbers that you want to be tracking, that you want to have on your radar. And of course, we talked about the essentials, the numbers that are a surprise to us, right? So those are your necessary expenses, what you live on a month-to-month basis, your fun and entertainment costs, and the maintenance costs of a car or a house. You want to track those three areas, those numbers in those three areas diligently. You definitely want to track those diligently because that impacts the other areas that we spoke about. That impacts your net worth, that impacts how much you can put towards retirement, how much you can put towards your emergency savings. That also impacts your tax liability in the sense of not necessarily how much you're making, but more of if whatever tax bill comes due, you want to be prepared for whatever you need to pay. So we talked about the three necessary areas that you definitely want to track diligently, but we also talked about four money numbers that you definitely want to be on your radar. And that's your net worth, your emergency savings, the amount in your emergency savings, the amount in your retirement savings, and basically how much you've paid in taxes, to have an awareness and so you can ask those questions. So let me know what questions you have. Let me know if this was helpful. Let me know if this was like, oh my gosh, this was confusing. Whatever thoughts you may have, I am open. I just wanted to create this conversation and get you thinking a little bit differently and hopefully open your mind to more, whether questions and getting just curious about your own finances. So next week, and not just next week, for the next several months, we are taking a break here on the podcast. But what we're going to be doing, we're not going to be completely gone, y'all. What we are going to be doing is we're going to be having a summer playlist where we are going to be releasing one episode every week from our catalog. And remember, we have just over 400 episodes. And with that, we're going to be choosing our team. I'm going to choose one. My editor is going to choose one. Our Daniela is going to choose one. Also, maybe I'll get my family to choose from. Also, I want you to chime in what your favorite episode was so we can, submit your favorite episode so we can insert it in our playlist for the summer. To submit that, you can go to jenhemphill.com, my vote playlist. So that's jenhemphill.com, my vote playlist. You'll also find that in today's show notes. So again, each week for the summer, we're going to be releasing a past episode from the catalog that you voted on, one that we designated as our top pick. And that way you're going to get to listen to some of the episodes that maybe you haven't listened to, especially if you are a new listener. Plus, what we're also going to be doing in addition to that, we're going to be also showcasing episodes from other podcasts that are similar to that topic as well. So it's going to be a fun summer. We're going to change it up while taking a little bit of a break. So I hope that you enjoy that. Bueno, pues that is everything. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to tune in to the show. I know you have a ton of podcasts to choose from, but you chose to spend some time here. So I appreciate that. You can check out the show notes over at jenhemphill.com/402. That is jenhemphill.com/402. Remember that being the reina of your money starts now simply by claiming it. I believe in you, and so should you. Nos hablaremos el próximo jueves. Ciao.